Do you want to have some of the strongest pals on your team, or some of the best best base working pals out there? Well, look no further, because today I'm going to teach you how to do just that in one of the most efficient ways possible with breeding, and be able to get almost any pal starting from as early as rank 19. Not only that, but I'm going to be showing you a method so efficient that once you're done, you will almost always have your breedable pal that you desire within 2 breeding chains from wherever you start. So let's get right into it. First and foremost, you will be needing to unlock breeding, which is within rank 19 in the technology tree, and once here we will be able to breed almost anything in the game. Breeding requires a couple of things to even start. To have a female and male make an egg in Palworld, you need to have a cake in the chest that comes with the building in order to have the pals make an egg at all. In order to actually make a cake, you'll need 8 eggs, 7 milk, 2 honey, 8 berries, and 5 flour. Some of these ingredients are straight up buyable from select merchants in the game for cheap coin, but making cakes over and over will definitely stack up your bills, so I'll just be showing you how to make them at your base instead. The easier ones to get right from your base are definitely berries and flour. Have your harvesting, water, and planting pals work on wheat and berry plantations in order to build up your supply. Then, use the mill to turn your wheat into flour, and you'll have 2 of the 5 ingredients, making themselves in a cycle in no time. The other 3 are specific pal dependent ingredients. You'll need chickpea, mozzarella, and bee guard in order to make your eggs, milk, and honey respectively in a ranch in your base as well. After a while, these pals in the ranch will produce these products and be collectible by either you or a transporting pal at your base. But be careful though, because these items classify as food of course on their own and will be put in a feeder if room is available. In order to avoid having your pals eat this food, make sure to fill up your feeder by putting their food to actually eat in the leftmost slot and put the other ingredients either to the right of it or in another place entirely. If you have your harvested berries and an abundance of them on the leftmost slot, they will never touch the food to the right of it, but it will be rotting or deteriorating over time except for the honey, because the honey doesn't do this. And the pals just never happen to touch the food on the right, because pals eat from left to right in terms of food put in the feeder until all the food in the first slot is used up. Also, quick pro tip, if you leave the flour on the mill and only collect it when you need it to actually make a cake, it won't deteriorate or rot, and cake doesn't rot while in the breeding chest, at least not currently. I'll put a map up on screen now and show you where you can find these 3 pals in particular to get your ranch and cakes going. Chickpea and mozzarella are relatively low level and can be found pretty commonly, but bee guards are definitely where the problems come in. Bee guards almost always travel in groups and are relatively pretty high level to the level to which you can start breeding, so alternatively to trying to catch one straight up, you can look around their spawning area for eggs that may contain them, or buy them straight up from a merchant or black market merchant that sells pals and look for them there. Luckily enough, I made my first home base by a black market merchant, so I was able to check pretty consistently. I'll show you some notable pal merchant locations on screen as well. In order to get the money to afford them, make sure to do dungeons and kill any overworld bosses that are possible at your current level for all of their sellable rewards. But what you could also do is one of the other setups we need for our processes in the breeding method will also net you good money, so you could do that earlier in case you do run into a bee guard at a merchant and you don't want to miss out on them while they're available. Once you have all of these pals at your ranch at your base in order to get you all of your needed ingredients, then you'll need to make a cooking pot. Although I personally recommend making 2 to 3 pots because the process for making cakes is so cripplingly slow, especially if you only have a level 1 kindling pal. Eventually, once you have a ton of ingredients, using multiple pots actually makes the process a little bit faster and helps you keep up with the cakes needed for breeding. Once you have the cooking pots actually set up, deploy a flame pal for every cooking pot you made. The higher their kindling level, the better, as it'll make the cakes be cooked a little bit faster. Alright, now that we've done all of the setup for this GTA heist, now we get to the meat and potatoes, which is how to breed passives down easily with my go-to breeding method. In our method, we're going to be making the best purebred pal we can in order to breed all of our other desired pals from there moving forward. Think of it kind of like having a Ditto in Pokemon with perfect IVs, but instead of being able to breed with any pal to get a near perfect version, we are now able to breed into a pal we want, and with the passives we want, as easily as possible since this game doesn't currently have a Ditto type of pal. Breeding works very uniquely in this game. Every PAL has a set number of breeding power assigned to it from the values of 1 to 1500, and the closer to 1, the stronger, more legendary the PAL probably is, and the closer to 1500, the more common and low leveled the PAL probably is. The breeding then takes the averages of the two values and determines the result of the breeding session between the two PALs. These breeding combos are static, meaning if you use a certain combination, it will always have the same result every time. In order to get a PAL that can breed into almost anything we want and easily, we need a PAL with legendary numbers, but something that is easy enough to get at rank 19 when we first start off with breeding. This PAL in question that we're going to be using is Jormuntide. Jormuntide is a late game PAL with great stats and even a level 4 watering base ability that towers over most PALs in sheer height, and is fightable in the early game zone, but at alpha level 45. So how do we catch him in order to start this process? The answer is, we don't. We're gonna be breeding for him. In order to breed for him, the first step is catching or breeding a Grizzbolt. Although I recommend catching him unless you happen to have a late game Rayhound or mid game Masanda, since other than Grizzbolt female and male breeding combo, it is the only other combination that breeds a Grizzbolt. Grizzbolt is findable in PAL Sanctuary number 1, which is southwest off the default spawning island at the beginning of the game. In order to get here, make sure to have a Nightwing saddle and Nightwing to be able to make it to the island. Nightwings can usually be found in these locations up a little bit in the sky, but the most consistent place I've been able to find them is at this specific tower in the sky right when you fast travel there. The PAL Sanctuary Island itself has a rare chance of spawning Grizzbolt, so it may actually take a couple of tries to find him there, but this is the only location it naturally spawns. Also, here you can find purple chests that give amazing items like sapphires to sell and schematics for handguns you can craft early even before you're actually supposed to, and more. With the money you get from selling the sapphires, you can actually get that B-Guard if you're still looking for one, or you can now start looking for Grizzbolt at those PAL merchants if you're having no luck at the Sanctuary. Now, once you actually have a Grizzbolt, I recommend a couple of things because this is where the major breeding commences. I heavily recommend you pull up one of the breeding apps for Palworld. I personally use Game8's Palworld breeding calculator, but using the community spreadsheet, Palpedia, Palworld.gg, or anything else will work just as well. This will help you know what parent combos lead to what PALs, and what you'll need to catch for certain breeding combos moving forward. Next, and probably the most important one here, if you're the host of your server, either in single player or multiplayer, back out of the game session and go back to the screen before you start your server. Before clicking enter game, you're able to re-customize your options even if you already made and played in the world. Make sure to turn your egg incubation time to 0 so eggs instantly hatch. You don't have to, but it will save you a ton of time. Even if you do really want to just play vanilla, I recommend at least breeding your insane Jormuntide before changing the settings back and playing the game as normal, since this is going to be a long process. After this, you have two really good options. Either try your luck in catching the best passive stacked or lucky version of a Nightwing or Sweepa, or try breeding the best Sweepa or Nightwing to breed with your Grizzbolt. As I touched on before, Grizzbolt only has 2 breeding combinations, so trying to perfect it passive-wise is way harder because the ways to acquire it are pretty limited, at least until mid to late game, when it's easier to come across and catch Masandas and Rayhound. But coming across Nightwings and Sweepas and even their alpha versions are easily doable and at insanely low levels too, with Sweepa's alpha being located here at level 11 and Nightwing's alpha being located here at level 18, which are definitely more than doable once you've got the breeding farm. Also, these alphas tend to have better chances at good passives, so catching them whenever they respawn as an overworld boss may net you the passives you've been looking for. Speaking of which, next is your other roadblock, knowing which passives you're actually looking for. This really depends on you and what you want for your pals moving forward, but I would recommend you focus on one major category to start off. Let's just say moving forward, you decide you want the strongest pals that will hit as strong as possible at all times. Then you'll want passives like Musclehead, Ferocious, Lucky, Legendary, and Hooligan. All of these give general attack up percentages, aren't attack specific, so they work with whatever attacks they learn or are given from fruits, and only boast detriments to things you can use other pals for, like base activities. Of course, you yourself could always choose to use type-specific passives that boost elemental attacks, but personally, I prefer to be able to have the option to vary my attack types if I ever wanted to, and still get the same type of damage boost. If you want to have the best working base pals, then you'll want passives that up their work speed, have lower morale drops, or appetite interruptions that would distract them from their base activities like hard worker, workaholic, artisan, diet lover, work slave, or lucky. These are only some of the major passives in the game, although I do think these are the best in the game for those specific types of pals you'll be wanting to breed. Another thing to note is that Lucky and Legendary are only passives you can obtain from catching certain pals out in the wild. Legendary coming from super late game Legendary pals, and Lucky coming from Lucky pals that have a low chance of spawning out in the open world. The thing is, these passives can be bred into other pals if you have one with these passives as the parent. So, if you want them, you have to catch those respective pals and breed them into a combo that leads to Jormuntide in one way or another. Also, something else that can definitely roadblock you in your breeding journey is you having the passives you want, but both parent pals with them are the same gender. The only way I think I've had better chances of overcoming this is to breed the pal that has all the passives you want with a no passive version or almost no passive having version of that pal to try and get a full transfer of the parent's passives in another gender. This seemed to work for me way better than breeding it with another pal with other passives I definitely didn't want. But it still has a chance of giving you the same gender again even if it works, which is definitely frustrating and honestly almost made me give up on my first attempt at making my purebred Jormuntides. Also keep in mind that mutations are 1000% possible, so you could have passives pop up that neither parent has, or even have completely new passives replace the passives you're trying to carry over to your pal egg completely. This portion seems to be all random, but it seems you have a way higher chance of just transferring passives from the parents to the child from the pool of passives shared between them. Now let's get back to the Jormuntide. Once you have the passives you want on your Nightwing or Sweepa, whether it be through catching or with breeding, now comes the random part we just mentioned when breeding it with Grisbold. But once you have two Jormuntides, male and female, with most of the passives you want among them, personally I would switch to breeding the Jormuntides among themselves exclusively if the passives are lining up. For example, let's say one Jormuntide is a male with Lucky and Musclehead, and one Jormuntide is a female but with just Ferocious. At this point, I would switch from my Nightwing and Grisbold parents to just full Jormuntide parents because they contain the exact passive combos I want, while more than likely Grisbold is a random factor since he is definitely the harder one to catch or breed for. When you're using Jormuntide in the future to breed for a pal 2 breeding chains away, this is one of the most important and effective ways to breed those with your preferred passives as fast as possible, because this takes away a random pool of passives that you don't want from the parent that you are now using that isn't stacked. I will showcase this more in detail with an example later on. Getting back on topic, this could take you one try to get all of the passives you want onto your Jormuntide, or it could take you hundreds. For me, it took me an entire day of breeding off stream with my friend Andre to get this entire process done and have a male and female Jormuntide with the exact passives we were looking for. This included finding a lucky Nightwing and breeding it with other pals to get a great Nightwing to breed it with Grisbold to finally get the passive stacks we wanted on both a male version and female version of Jormuntide. If possible, getting the exact passives you want on both genders is extremely optimal because it means you'll have the passives you really want available to breed with any pal no matter the gender, and it'll make breed combos if necessary easier and more streamlined since you won't have to worry about whether or not the other parent is going to be the right gender. Not to mention, if the other parent pal has the passives you want on it lined up, it makes the breeding way more optimal and likely to succeed the way you want. And you don't have to worry about getting roadblocked by the gender of the other parent pal to do it. Once you've actually obtained your passive stacked Jormuntide, the hard part is over. Jormuntide is usable in most breed possible combos, and if he isn't, then he is more than likely just one or two PAL breeding passive transfers away from actually attaining said desired PAL. Unless, of course, you're talking about legendaries and a few select other PALs which are only able to breed with themselves to produce more of themselves. The reason this is important is because now you won't have to pray the egg just hatches with passives you want or keep looking for parents over and over and over for all the passives you want to carry to your desired breedable PAL. For example, I really wanted Lylene Noct. It's a lot easier to get this full attack version with the passives Musclehead, Ferocious, Lucky, and Hooligan because of breeding with Jormuntide. Breeding with the first combo netted me the 3 passives I wanted among 2 of their offspring, being this Menacing. So on the second combo, I used the next 2 in line for the combo needed to get to Lylene Noct to produce more offspring, and when the Lylene Noct passives themselves lined up with the passives I wanted, I bred those offspring together to get the desired Lylene Noct I wanted with all of the passives. It took me about 6 Menacings, which was a combo Jormuntide was a direct part of in order to make a perfect Menacing, which was insanely quick in terms of breeding, and it took me 14 Lylene Nocts from there to get my perfect Lylene Noct. This was also while using unoptimal supplemental parent pals to get these said combos. The passives the other parent had were all random and not what I wanted. So far from my brief experience with breeding in Palworld, I feel like the real key is when breeding or going on a breeding combo is to try and have 2 or 3 passives on one of the 2 parents and get another 1 or 2 from the other parent with as many of them as possible being the same on both parents, so you can get the best results possible from the egg. An example of this would be one Jormuntide with Musclehead, Hooligan, and Lucky, and another Jormuntide with Lucky, Hooligan, and Ferocious. I personally think that breeding pals with these passive sets would make it easier to get the Jormuntide with Lucky, Hooligan, Musclehead, and Ferocious that we would be looking for in this scenario, even if they only had one shared passive we wanted between them. Once you have the passives lined up for at least one of the parents though, you are already lined up for a good success rate, as you can see from my experience with breeding my iteration of a perfect Lylene Noct. And for all the times you breed a perfect different pal, it opens up the possibility of breeding perfect pals faster later on with different chains, and eventually, you'll be able to do breeds for perfect passives even faster, for all the ones that Jormuntide can't cover in one breed combo of his own. For example, now that I have a Menacing and a Lylene Noct that are perfect for what I want moving forward, if a pal I want later on can be bred by one of them being the parent, and not my Jormuntides, getting that perfect pal through breeding is now easier because of my choice to breed perfect versions of these pals earlier. In order to actually breed using these Jormuntides going forward, go on one of the Palworld breeding calculator apps like I mentioned before. I don't know how the other ones work too well, but for Game8's breeding calculator, you just type in the name of the pal you want to breed. Once you type in that name, it'll show you all the possible combinations to make that pal in particular. If Jormuntide isn't on any list of those combos, click on all of the parents until you find one that has a mix of Jormuntide to make that said parent. If Jormuntide is a part of the combo that makes your desired pal, the breeding chain will just be 1, making it extremely easy to breed your passives from Jormuntide to your desired pal. Think back to my Menacing. And if it takes you digging into a parent to find a Jormuntide breed combo, the breed chain will be 2 and take longer to get your desired passive to your desired breedable pal. Think to my Lylene Noct. Because a lot of the pals in the game have a ton of different combos to breed them until you get to late game pals, it's easy to find a Jormuntide in the list of possible parent combinations. And Jormuntide is still fairly close to the point value of 1 enough to also be able to breed into good late game pals easily as well. It may take you going through a couple of combinations to find one with Jormuntide, but like I mentioned at the beginning, he is usable for most of the pals you'll probably want. So again, as an example, I knew I really wanted Lylene Noct. I looked it up on Game8's calculator and saw it only had 2 combos, Lylene and Menacing, and Lylene Noct and Lylene Noct. So then after realizing I couldn't make it with Jormuntide, I then clicked on Lylene and saw I could make that with other pals I had, and saw on Menacing, Jormuntide was a direct combo for it. So I passed down all my desired passives into a god Menacing, then bred that Menacing with Lylene until I got all the passives I wanted onto 2 separate Lylene Nocts. You can help make this process a little better by having similar passives on Lylene or the breeding parents you use for her, but it's not necessary since this one side is stacked already. Once I had a Lylene knocked with most of the passives I wanted and another one with the last one I wanted, I bred them until I got the perfect one for me and called it a day. Because of Jormuntide, this made the process relatively fast, and I didn't have to find 3 or 4 of the same pal that just happened to have the passives I wanted to start this. Or hope and pray that the egg hatched and just would randomly have the passives I wanted either. And on top of this, as we mentioned before, this added Menacing and Lylene Noct to our breeding pals that have the stats we are looking for moving forward, making combinations containing them or Jormuntide way easier to transfer my desired passives and opens up even faster paths to breeding them to desired pals in the future. Alright guys, so I know this was a lot to take in, and even the way I explained it might not have clicked with you entirely, which is why I will be answering all questions I can in the comment section down below. But to sum everything up as simple as possible, set up the breeding farm and everything you need to get it running, including a way to get all cake ingredients when needed. Decide the passives you want to go for. I recommend focusing on one type, either base building pals, fighting pals, or fast moving pals. Once you do that, grab a Grizzbolt from Pal Sanctuary number 1, check it often since it's a rare spawn. Then breed or catch a Sweeper or Nightwing with the passive traits you desire. Breed those two together and get Jormuntides that line up with the passives you need. Don't stop until you have a male and female version with all the passives you want. Make sure that once you start getting pals with overlapping wanted passives, to start breeding those instead of ones with all passives wanted and another one that doesn't have the passives you want. An example of this would be, don't use your stacked Nightwing and random Grizzbolt over 2 Jormuntides that have a mix of all the passives you want. This gives you a higher chance of getting a Jormuntide with all the passives you want in one. After finally getting your perfect Jormuntides, use them to create any pal you want using breeding calculators and find which combinations need Jormuntide to breed them. And finally, get to cracking open some eggs, since getting pals with all the passives you want will be a long journey. In the absolute worst case scenario, use all of these methods and tips in order to start from scratch on any pals that aren't in any feasible good combos with Jormuntide and go from there. This will definitely be happening when you get to the later part of the game and want to breed legendaries. You have all of the knowledge now, all that matters is executing it. Again, I'll be answering all questions in the comments if you guys have any that I can answer, and of course, make sure to hit this video with a like if it helped you out at all in any way, because that helps me out tremendously with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you like the content, make sure to subscribe for some more Palworld gameplay and coverage moving forward. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to catch you guys next time. Peace!